police officer from Maine arrested by ICE has agreed to voluntarily leave the country, according to the Associated Press. Agents arrested Old Orchard Beach Reserve officer Jon Luke Evans of Jamaica in July.
A police officer in Maine, once cleared to wear the badge, has just been forced to leave the United States after being detained by ICE. The twist? Washington's system had already approved him to work legally. So how does a man go from trusted law enforcer to unwanted immigrant overnight? Let's find that out. Old Orchard Beach, a coastal town known more for tourists than turmoil, was thrown into the national spotlight this summer after a dramatic twist in its police department. Jon Luke Evans, a reserve officer serving in the town's police force, was taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE on July 25th. By mid-August, the case concluded with a quiet but shocking outcome. Evans agreed to voluntarily depart the United States. The announcement caught residents off guard. One day, Evans was in uniform, serving his community. Next, he was sitting in an immigration detention facility, fighting not for justice, but for the right to stay in the very country whose laws he helped enforce. ICE accused him of overstaying his visa and attempting to illegally purchase a firearm. A federal judge approved voluntary departure, a legal pathway allowing Evans to leave at his own expense rather than face deportation, which often carries harsher bans on re-entry. The speed of the case was striking. Immigration proceedings in the U.S. often drag on for months, if not years. Evans's case, however, moved with unusual swiftness, as though there was an urgency to resolve it before it spiraled into a bigger public debate. For the town, the message was clear. The federal government had made up its mind, and Evans's days in America were over. Yet the story did not end with the court's decision. It was the circumstances surrounding his arrest that transformed a routine immigration enforcement action into a full-blown controversy. When Old Orchard Beach hired Evans, town officials had gone through the federally required process of checking his work eligibility. Using E-Verify, the Department of Homeland Security's database, they received confirmation that Evans was legally allowed to work. That is why he was employed and why he wore the badge. But ICE told a different story. After Evans's arrest, Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security Tricia McLaughlin condemned the town for what she called reckless reliance on E-Verify. The statement stunned officials. Reckless reliance? The town had followed the federal rules exactly as written. They had not cut corners or ignored protocols. Instead, they trusted the very system the government itself designed. The contradiction lit a firestorm. Was E-Verify flawed? Was ICE using Evans's case to send a political message? Or worse, was the government deliberately shifting blame onto local officials to cover its failures? Chief Elise Chard, speaking on behalf of the department, made it clear that the town stood by its actions. We will continue to rely on the I-9 Employment Eligibility Verification Form and the E-Verify database to confirm employment eligibility. While town leaders defended themselves, confusion deepened over Evans's detention. ICE's official database showed him held at the Donald W. Wyatt Detention Facility in Rhode Island, but the facility confirmed he had already been transferred to an ICE location in Burlington, Massachusetts. Even basic details about where Evans was being held became murky. Requests for clarification went unanswered. For residents, the affair left more questions than answers. How could a man be simultaneously cleared to work and yet arrested for being unauthorized? How could Washington scold a town for relying on the very tool it ordered them to use? And why did the process move with such unusual speed, as though silencing a debate before it could fully ignite? The breaking news is clear. Jon Luke Evans, the police officer once trusted to serve, will now leave the United States. But the real issue is just beginning. Because if compliance with the system is not enough, then what is the system designed to do? If there is one truth Evans's case has exposed, it is that America's immigration enforcement is less about consistency and more about control. What unfolded in Old Orchard Beach is not the story of a man who broke the rules, but of a government that breaks its own rules whenever convenient. The United States presents E-Verify as its gold standard for employment checks. Employers are told they must use it, towns and companies are punished if they fail to use it, and compliance is framed as the first line of defense against unauthorized workers. Evans passed through that system. That should have been the end of the matter. But instead, ICE swept in, discarding its clearance and blaming the town for trusting it. This is not a technical glitch, it is a feature. By keeping the system ambiguous, the federal government maintains ultimate discretion. E-Verify may approve you, but that approval can be invalidated at any moment. It functions less as a guarantee and more as a trap, a way to assure employers they are safe while keeping workers permanently insecure. The contradiction also reveals how Washington handles accountability. When the system fails, blame is never directed inward. Instead, it is projected outward, onto towns, employers, or the very individuals who relied on the system in good faith. Old Orchard Beach was scolded for reckless reliance on E-Verify, but what other option did it have? To ignore the government's database? To hire based on guesswork? In reality, the accusation was less about recklessness than about control, a reminder that no matter what you do, Washington has the final say. This shifting of blame is not just bureaucratic, it is political. In Evans's case, ICE quickly emphasized the allegations of a visa overstay and a firearm purchase attempt, framing him not just as unauthorized, but as dangerous. Yet the timing makes one wonder, if Evans was such a threat, why did the government system certify him in the first place? The answer lies in selective enforcement. As long as Evans was invisible, one name among thousands in the system, he passed. But the moment he became visible in a sensitive role, wearing a badge, the system was no longer willing to stand by its approval. That visibility is what transformed Evans into a target. A black man, an immigrant, serving in a position of authority. For some in Washington, that combination is intolerable. By invalidating him, the government wasn't just correcting a bureaucratic mistake. It was reasserting the hierarchy. Immigrants may labor, but they may not enforce. They may serve, but they may not wield power. The irony is that this contradiction breeds exactly what it claims to prevent: distrust. If towns cannot rely on federal systems, they may stop using them altogether, exposing themselves to legal risks. If immigrants cannot trust that passing through the system protects them, they live in permanent fear. In both cases, the outcome is instability. And instability, ironically, strengthens federal control. So perhaps the system is working exactly as intended. It is not designed to provide clarity or certainty. It is designed to keep both employers and immigrants on edge, never secure enough to challenge federal authority. But that brings us to the deeper question. Why now? Why would the federal government, after years of relying on ambiguity, suddenly move so aggressively against Evans, forcing his removal with such speed? The answer lies not in the system itself, but in the politics shaping it, and in the figure who has returned to power, determined to make examples out of people like Evans. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. When examining why Evans's case unfolded with such swiftness, one cannot ignore the broader political climate shaping America today. Donald Trump's return to the White House in 2025 has revived his signature playbook, a relentless focus on immigration enforcement as both policy and performance. For Trump, immigration is not merely an issue of legality. It is a stage for power, a way to prove control, and a weapon to mobilize his base. Visa overstays have become the new centerpiece of this crackdown. In his first term, Trump's rhetoric focused heavily on the southern border, painting images of caravans and chaotic crossings. But now, in his second term, the spotlight has shifted. Trump repeatedly told his supporters that overstays were the silent invasion, more insidious because they were harder to see and harder to stop. Evans, a Jamaican officer in uniform, became the perfect case study to dramatize that claim. Here was someone who had overstayed, according to ICE, yet managed to integrate so fully that he was wearing the badge of the centerpiece of Trump's perspective. Removing Evans was not just law enforcement, it was political theater. By forcing a high-profile departure, Trump could point to Evans and say, "Look, even the ones who passed the checks, Even the ones in uniform can't be trusted. It was a performance designed to stoke fear, reassure supporters, and reinforce the idea that Trump alone had the will to clean house. But beyond the theatrics lies something even deeper: the unease with black authority. Evans was not just another immigrant. He was a black immigrant wielding state power. In Trump's America, that image clashes directly with the narrative of who gets to enforce the law and who is meant to be policed. To see a Jamaican-born man exercising authority in a U.S. police department punctured the mythology of white guardianship over law and order. That is why Evans had to be erased. His very presence undermined the political story Trump wanted to tell. This is not unprecedented. Throughout American history, whenever black men and women have gained authority within state institutions, the backlash has been swift. From Reconstruction-era black sheriffs and legislators violently ousted from office, to mid-20th century civil rights leaders harassed by the FBI, the pattern is clear. Black authority is tolerated only conditionally, never fully accepted. Evans's removal fits neatly into that lineage. It is the same old playbook, modernized through immigration law. Trump has always understood the symbolic power of who is allowed to wield authority. By stripping Evans of his badge and branding him an outsider, Trump reaffirmed a message to his base. America's guardianship belongs to them, not to outsiders, and certainly not to black immigrants. It was less about Evans's visa and more about who gets to embody American legitimacy. Yet in the rush to send this message, Trump's administration exposed its contradictions. If E-Verify could greenlight someone like Evans, then the system itself is unreliable. If the system is unreliable, then millions of other workers approved by it are now suspect. By attacking Evans, Trump was not just undermining one man, he was undermining trust in the very system his government forces employers to use. The irony is that this chaos strengthens Trump's political appeal. To his supporters, confusion is proof that the system is broken, and only he has the will to fix it. And yet, as dramatic as the American stage may seem, Evans's story points to something larger than Trump's politics alone. Because what happened in Maine mirrors what is happening far beyond America's borders. It echoes a global pattern, one that African nations know all too well. Follow the rules, comply with the system, and still face punishment the moment you assert visibility or authority. So the question becomes, is this just Trump's America? Or is it part of the same colonial script the West has always used to undermine black legitimacy worldwide? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. To understand why Evans's story resonates far beyond Maine, we must step back and look at Africa's long encounter with the West. What happened to a Jamaican-born officer in America is not an isolated injustice. It is part of a global script that has been playing out for centuries. The rules are written not to empower, but to betray the moment black authority grows too strong. Consider the recent experiences of countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. For decades, these nations were told by Western institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and the European Union, to follow a strict set of rules. Liberalize your markets, adopt structural reforms, depend on Western troops for security, accept Western currencies like the CFA franc. These instructions were presented as the pathway to legitimacy, the E-Verify of sovereignty. If you complied, you were considered responsible partners in the global order. But the moment these nations asserted true independence, the rules changed. When Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré began nationalizing its gold and building its financial institutions, suddenly it was branded reckless, even dangerous. When Mali under Assimi Goïta expelled French forces and turned to new partners like Russia, Western media condemned the move as destabilizing, despite years of failure under foreign-led strategies. When Niger decided to reclaim its uranium from French control, it too was painted as a threat to global stability. The accusation was always the same: reckless, illegitimate, untrustworthy, no matter how closely these nations had followed the rules before. This mirrors Evans's trajectory almost exactly. He followed the US system. He was approved. He wore the badge. But the moment his authority became too visible, too undeniable, the system reversed itself and cast him out. Just as Africa is told it cannot be trusted with its resources, Evans was told he could not be trusted with a badge. The script is identical. Black authority is conditional, never permanent. The betrayal is not accidental, it is strategic. Systems like E-Verify in the US or IMF compliance mechanisms in Africa are designed not to guarantee security, but to preserve leverage. They create the illusion of acceptance while keeping power centralized in the hands of those who wrote the rules. As long as you remain invisible or subordinate, the system tolerates you. The moment you assert autonomy, the tolerance evaporates. The rhetoric used to justify the betrayal is also eerily similar. When DHS accused Old Orchard Beach of reckless reliance on E-Verify, it was the same rhetorical sleight of hand the West uses against African nations. When African economies collapse under Western-designed structural adjustment programs, the blame is shifted back onto the Africans themselves. Reckless spending, reckless leadership, reckless independence. Never the system, always the people. In both cases, the victim is made to appear as the culprit. This is why Evans's case cannot be seen as a local immigration dispute. It is a case study in how Western power operates against Black legitimacy worldwide. The same forces that strip an officer of his badge in Maine strip African nations of their sovereignty in global politics. Both are punished not for breaking the rules, but for daring to exist with authority inside them. So Evans's departure is more than a personal loss. It is symbolic of the broader African struggle. The constant reminder that compliance will not protect you because the rules were never meant to provide protection. They were written to maintain dependency. But that leaves us with one final question. If the system is designed to betray, what lessons should communities, in Maine, in Africa, and across the diaspora, take from Evans's removal? Jon Luke Evans has now agreed to leave the United States quietly, under the legal mechanism of voluntary departure. There will be no deportation headlines, no courtroom battles stretched over months, no dramatic appeals in the public eye. Instead, there will be silence. A man once entrusted with enforcing the law slipping out of the country under the weight of the very system he once served. On paper, voluntary departure looks like a compromise. It spares Evans the harshest penalties, such as a bar on re-entry for years, and allows him to exit on his terms. But beneath the legal language, the reality is harsher. This is not compromise, but erasure. Evans leaves stripped of the legitimacy he once held, dismissed as if his service and approval meant nothing. And the quietness of his departure is itself a tactic, designed to remove him without sparking the outrage a drawn-out deportation might have caused. For Old Orchard Beach, the lesson is bitter. The town did what it was told to do. It followed federal guidelines, trusted federal systems, and believed that compliance equaled safety. Instead, it was publicly scolded, accused of recklessness, and left to deal with the fallout of a system that contradicted itself. The warning is clear. Local communities cannot depend on Washington's rules for protection. The rules exist to serve Washington's interests, not to protect those who follow them. For America's Black and immigrant communities, the warning cuts even deeper. Evans's removal shows that loyalty is not a shield. Wearing the badge is not a safeguard. Passing the checks is not a guarantee. Authority, when embodied by a Black immigrant, is tolerated only on borrowed time. The moment it becomes inconvenient or politically useful to erase it, the system will do so without hesitation. Communities are reminded once again that visibility does not equal belonging, and service does not equal acceptance. And for Africa, watching from across the ocean, Evans's story is a mirror. It reinforces what history has always shown. Compliance with Western systems does not buy true security. Just as Evans passed E-Verify only to be arrested later, African nations comply with IMF loans or Western security frameworks only to be punished when they assert independence. The message is consistent. Sovereignty in Black hands is always conditional, always vulnerable to revocation. Yet in this warning lies an opportunity. If the system cannot be trusted to protect those who play by its rules, then perhaps the lesson is to stop seeking legitimacy within that system altogether. For Old Orchard Beach, that might mean questioning blind reliance on federal databases. For immigrant communities, it may mean building solidarity and protection networks outside the structures of ICE and DHS. And for Africa, It means what leaders like Ibrahim Traoré have already begun to argue. True sovereignty comes not from compliance with Western systems, but from creating alternatives that cannot be revoked at will. Evans's departure may seem small, one officer leaving one town, but symbolically, it is enormous. It reveals the fragility of Black authority and systems built on distrust. It shows that power is tolerated, but never fully accepted. And it warns us that unless new systems are built, betrayal will always be the final chapter. So as Evans leaves America, the silence surrounding his case should not be mistaken for closure. It should be heard as an alarm bell, ringing across communities in the US and across nations in Africa. Do not mistake compliance for security. The rules were never written to protect you, and that is the final lesson his departure leaves behind. If a police badge couldn't protect Evans, what protects the rest of us? When will Africa and its people stop trusting rules designed to betray them? Let us know in the comment section. Isn't it time we built systems where our authority can't be revoked? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.